Hello and welcome everyone to the Data Europa Academy's webinar on Open Data Maturity Report 2022, looking at the progress and trends across European countries. My name is Flora Copelou, and I work for the Publications Office of the European Union for data.europa.eu, the official portal for European data. Today, I have the pleasure to open the session, during which Julia Karsaniga, our research and policy lead consultant from Capgemini, and Eline Klein-Arians, our communication and Data Europe Academy lead from Capgemini Invent, will share with us the key concepts, methodologies, and trends about the Open Data Maturity Report 2022. So before we move to today's agenda, let me remind you some rules of the game. So this webinar is currently being recorded, and this recording will be available to you following the session, and we will make sure to inform you all via mail. Please keep your mic switched off during the session. This is very important so our presenters can present smoothly. Also, in the end of the session, we will kindly ask you to provide us with your feedback. It will take even less 3 minutes of your time, but will be very beneficial for us in order to further improve our next webinars. And lastly, for any questions you might have during the session, feel free to use our Teams chat. We will make sure to answer to your questions. We will have a dedicated Q&A session. And in case we don't have enough time to answer for your questions today, we are planning to share with you, following the session, a report answering to all of your questions. And having said this, I am now passing the mic to Julia to take us through today's agenda. Julia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Flora. And good morning, everyone, also from my side. Very happy to see so many of you today here. As mentioned, my name is Julia, and today I'm here with my colleague Eline to talk about the flagship publication of data.europa.eu, the Open Data Maturity Assessment. As you can see from this slide, our agenda for today is quite packed, so I will go directly to what you can expect from today's webinar. This is the first of a series of webinars dedicated to Open Data Maturity Assessment. So what we want to do for today is, first of all, give you an introduction to Open Data Maturity Assessment, what it is and why it is conducted. Then we will focus more closely on the 2022 edition, starting with the methodological revision that this entailed. Then we will move, both me and Eline, to presenting you with the results of the 2022 assessment. And Eline will then conclude with the key trends that we can extrapolate from the 2022 report, and also looking at the future outlook in view of the EU legislative and policy landscape when it comes to data and open data. After the presentation, as mentioned by Flora, we will have also some time for questions. So feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and we will make sure to respond to them either during the Q&A later or in written form after the event. Okay, so if you're not already habitual readers of the Open Data Maturity report, the Open Data Maturity is an annual assessment into the state of open data in Europe. It has been conducted since 2015. So the 2022 edition is the 8th consecutive year that we publish it. The assessment was firstly produced by the European Commission and the European Data Portal. And since 2021, when the European Data Portal and the EU Open Data Portal were merged into data.europa.eu, this is under the brand of data.europa.eu, which is the official portal for European open data, so from EU institutions, but also national and regional portals. Throughout the years, this assessment has grown both in terms of content and also in terms of participating countries. In fact, in the 2022 edition, we had 35 participating countries. Beyond the EU 27, also 3 EFTA countries, Iceland, Norway, and Switzerland, and 5 candidate countries to the EU: Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, Serbia, and Ukraine. Why is this assessment conducted every year since 2015? Well, the Open Data Maturity Assessment, as said, wants to gain insights into the developments of open data across Europe. And it wants to do so to foster the improvement of open data in Europe. So it is not supposed to be seen as a race between the different countries, but rather as a way to encourage countries to do more, to do better, and to learn from each other. I think this is a particularly important point, learning from each other, and it is reflected also by the fact that the open data maturity is not only translating into the report that you can see displayed on this slide, and where you can find a lot of interesting examples from the different countries indeed, but the results are also accessible through a dashboard, as well as country fact sheets and country questionnaires. All of these you can find on data.europa.eu dedicated page that should also be linked in the chat. How is this assessment conducted? This is conducted every year by sending to open data national teams in the different countries an extensive questionnaire with questions on different open data topics, or as we will see, open data dimensions. These questionnaires are then gathered from our research team, and they go through a series of analysis and validation rounds, of course, always in close cooperation with the participating countries. I just mentioned that the questionnaires are based on dimensions, and also that the open data maturity assessment has expanded in terms of content. What do I mean with that? I mean that in 2015 until 2017, we had an assessment based only on 2 dimensions, maturity and readiness. And since 2018, we have 4 dimensions that you can see here: policy, impact, portal, and quality. The policy dimension focuses on countries' open data policies, indeed, strategies, so from the policy framework to the governance of open data to the implementation of open data strategies. The impact dimension looks into the activities and the tools to monitor open data reuse and the impact that is created through this reuse. The portal assesses the portal features, so the features of national open data portals. And the quality focuses on the mechanisms that ensure the quality of the metadata published on these portals. In 2022, as mentioned at the beginning, we also had a revision of the methodology, which led to 3 main changes. First of all questions were streamlined. Second, more focus was placed on upcoming regulations at EU level, especially the high-value datasets implementing regulation. And thirdly, the impact dimension was completely restructured. Streamlining the questions meant, for example, to add or reformulate specific questions to better capture regional and local developments of open data, and also to reflect the alignment of strategies and of policies with EU-wide priorities, such as, for instance, the EU Green Deal or the Europe Fit for Digital Age. The second change, as said, was about more focus on upcoming regulations. So talking about EU priorities, a priority for the European Commission was to list a series of high-value datasets, so datasets that are presenting some important benefits for the society, for the economy, and our environment. And at the time of the assessment for 2022, these implementing regulation listing these datasets and how they should be published and reused was not published yet. So what we did in the assessment was rather testing the EU member states' preparedness with respect to high-value datasets. And we did this across the 4 dimensions, as you can see from the questions listed on this slide. In January this year, the regulation was published, so we expect for upcoming assessments to reformulate these questions and to start assessing more the compliance level of member states with respect to the regulation and high-value data sets. The third change on the methodology was the restructuring of the open data impact dimension. This is both to better acknowledge the challenge that assessing impact of open data still represents for countries, as highlighted by them also in surveys that we conducted before this assessment, and to better distinguish between the reuse of open data and the impact that is created through this reuse. So as you can see on the slide, this restructuring led to the impact dimension being constructed around 3 indicators: strategic awareness, measuring reuse, and creating impact. The first one remained the same as the previous year in 2021, and it focuses on investigating whether it is important or not for countries to understand the level of reuse and of impact. The two following dimension, measuring reuse and creating impact, were initially one indicator. Now we have more focus in the measuring reuse on indeed all the tools that are and the mechanisms that are in place at member state and countries level to measure the reuse of their data sets and also acknowledge the reuser needs. While for the creating impact indicator, we focus more on how this reuse, the reuse of open data, creates impact on 4 impact areas: governmental, which was previously called political, the social, environmental, and economic impact area. But yes, I think enough now with theory. We have prepared for you a little quiz to guess the results, or maybe to answer the question if you already indeed read our report. So what you have to do is just to scan the QR code that you see here, or alternatively, you can go on the link that is shared in the chat and insert the number that you see on the screen. And yes, let's see. Then I see already many of you get in. That's very good. Nice. Okay, I will wait some more seconds. And then I will show you the question. So you should see the question on your screen. So which countries, according to you, made most progress between 2021 and 2022? This is the first question. Okay, so the correct answer I will tell you later, but indeed, as you can see, it was Czech Republic, Cyprus, and Portugal. More details later. Let's see if, and indeed, most of you guess it right, so happy to see that. Next question. Yeah, now, what is the best dimension in terms of scoring? So some of you guessed impact, interesting. Quality, We have policy also at the same level of quality, and portal 17. Okay, nice. I see some other people still answering. Okay, that is a very interesting picture. Let's see if it matches also reality. So I will share again the presentation. Yes. So for the first question, we asked you which country made the most progress. And as you can see here in the average maturity score, we had an overall 79% of maturity score in the EU 27 and 75% in the rest, in all participating countries. The first answer, which was mentioning France, Finland, and Slovenia, was not correct because compared to 2021, these countries stayed the same in terms of positions. In particular, you can see here France as a leading country for the 2022 assessment. It was the case also for 2021. In 2022, France was closely accompanied, I would say, by Ukraine, because the scores are very, very similar, 97% for France, 96% common 9 for Ukraine, which improved also from last year, especially in the policy dimension. The second answer was incorrect because it mentioned UK, which, as you can see, unfortunately did not participate in the 2022 assessment. And also Serbia did participate, but for the first time, so we don't have a comparison with respect to 2021. The correct answer was the third one, and so you guessed right, most of you, because Czech Republic had an increase going from the 23rd position in 2021 to the 12th position in 2022, so from 74% to 88% maturity level. And also, for instance, Portugal did quite a step, going from the 25th position to the 20th position in 2022, so from 66% to 76% maturity score. You can see this also in the next slide, which shows more or less the countries clustering. In fact, every year, based on the assessment, we cluster countries into 4 clusters based on their level. And this is not, again, for a race, but rather to have also more targeted recommendations for countries. And this is proved also by the fact that within the clusters, there is not so much difference among countries in terms of scoring. An example is trendsetters. We have a difference of 6% only in maturity score between France and Italy. You can see here some other countries that also had quite an interesting journey from 2021 to 2022. For example, indeed, Italy and Cyprus, which went from fast trackers in 2021 to trendsetters in 2022. And Belgium, which went from beginners in 2021 to followers in 2022. But if you're curious to know more about the journey of the countries in the different dimensions, I suggest you to stay tuned for the following webinars, where we will also have the perspective of member states and participating countries. Regarding the second question, you were not quite correct. So the guess was that impact is the most is the highest in score. Where is the contrary? We have impact being the least scored dimension, and policy being the most mature dimension. This was the case also in 2021. We had 86% in 2022 maturity score for policy and 87% in 2021, so a slight decrease, which still represented for policy to be the most mature dimension. You can see that countries doing particularly well in policy are, among others, Cyprus, Spain, and Ireland. And in general, we have a good overall performance in the policy framework indicator, which is the indicator also about which kind of policies are in place in the different countries. In fact, 100% of member states stated that in 2022, they have open data policy framework in place, and 96% of them adopted ad hoc strategies or equivalent papers. On the other side of the spectrum, as mentioned, impact is the dimension which is the least mature. 78% in 2021, and in 2022, 71%. So we see a drop of 7 percentage point, which, however, I would like to highlight is not so much to be seen as a decrease, but rather probably as a better picture of the challenge that assessing impact still represents for countries. Countries doing particularly well for impact are, among others, Czech Republic, France, and Italy. And the indicator where countries are doing best is the strategic awareness, which also tells us how important it is still for countries to measure and the reuse and the impact of open data. Interestingly, also the impact area where most impact is created, or country stated it is so, is the governmental impact. And here we have different examples of how government is made better through open data, for instance, in terms of transparency or in terms of effectiveness. And in the report, you can read very specific also use cases in this sense, from Italy to Sweden to Portugal. But what about portal and quality? I will give now the floor to my colleague Eline to tell you more about that.
Thank you, Julia, and good morning, everyone. So today I'll be discussing the portal and quality dimension with you, amongst other things. So as you can see in this slide, between 2021 and 2022, the overall score of the portal and quality dimensions have remained consistent at 83 and 77% respectively. In the portal domain, the top performers were France, Poland, and Ireland, with a 3% difference between the three countries, with 100% and 97%. And in the quality domain, it was Ukraine, France, and Norway, with a difference of actually 1% between those three countries. Regarding the portal dimension specifically, this year the best scoring indicator in the dimension was the portal usage. And one thing to note is that although the overall dimension score remained consistent at 83% in both years, there actually was a subtle change in the indicator score. This is especially notable in the portal features in the data provision, which can be attributed to the reshuffling or the rephrasing of questions regarding the high-value data sets. So in the portal features, for example, there's a slight increase here, and countries have reported to be using to have an increase in focus to prepare for implementing the high-value datasets. For example, Bulgaria has now assigned a dedicated category on the portal that can be selected through filters for the high-value datasets. And in Finland, they are now designating a specific symbol as an icon to highlight which of these datasets are high-value datasets. In addition, countries such as Spain plan to implement a functionality where they highlight a list of high-value datasets on the home page and have a see more option, so other countries can continue to find what high-value datasets are available, as well as others that can complement it. Regarding the quality dimension, as stated here, the indicator where countries are doing the best are the monitoring and measure section. However, what's also interesting is the increase in performance, or the change in performance, in the two indicators, currency and completeness, and the DCAT AP compliance. So regarding the currency and completeness, there has actually been a slight decrease in the score, so forgive the wording over here, and that is mostly in regards to preparing for also the high-value data sets. And countries have reported, and the reason for this decrease is that countries are now being more critical of how they are preparing to implement the high-value data sets and are looking for guidance and advice on what they can do to better prepare for it. This is, however, complemented and also links to the DCAT AP compliance, where there has been a notable increase of about 8% since 2021. This is mostly because there has been an increase in maturity on DCAT AP compliance. For reference, or for those who are not aware, DCAT is a W3C standard design that facilitates the interoperability between the data catalogs published on the web so that they're findable when they're harvested by other portals. With this increase, the reason for this increase is because national portals and data providers across Europe are becoming more aware of how to support other data providers in their countries in improving their compliance. This is, for example, seen with the Croatian National Open Data Portal team, which provides metadata quality assurance services for data providers through either documentation or their MQA service. Another example is Lithuania, where the portal provides data providers with a DCAT AP documentation and a direct link and support to the JoinUp platform on how to upgrade and increase their compliance. Moving on and seeing what this actually means now that Julie and I have presented the different dimensions, is that, as can be seen here, and as Julie already touched upon, this is the eighth consecutive assessment of the ODM. When it was first launched in 2015, the objective and the focus of this assessment was looking at the policy and the portal, what was happening in the EU landscape, how were the national data providers actually listening to this and implementing it on a national level, and what that meant for the portal and the findability and discoverability of the datasets. Over time, this shifted towards also measuring and looking at the quality of the available datasets as well as its impact. And this is notable in the first revision of the ODM and seen in 2018. Since then, and as maturity on this increased, there has been a steady increase in the maturity along these four dimensions over time, with only a slight decrease, as Julia mentioned, due to the methodology this year. So this decrease in the overall result in the impact section, for example, and also in the policy, is primarily due to the restructuring of questions from the revised methodology. And that is because we have the questions now have a sharper focus on how are we measuring the impact of the open data sets. Moving on, and this will also be touched on a bit more later, is the key trends that were observed here. So since 2018 and 2019, when there was a higher call for, okay, we are publishing all these data sets, we are now making them more discoverable via the portals, and we are listening to the policy, what does that actually mean, and what are overarching key trends that have been identified across Europe? So one of the ones for this year is preparing for implementing the high value data sets regulation. This was also a very highlighted trend in 2021, but it was actually already a topic of high interest and conversation since 2019, when the Open Data Directive was passed. Following this, data providers across Europe and also others in the open data community have already been asking, what will this mean for us? Now, following the official publication of the high-value datasets, we foresee that this is going to continue to be a topic of conversation, especially as it will be enforced next year. A second trend that was identified was measuring open data impact as a top priority and as a challenge. This has already been lightly touched upon, and I can elaborate a bit more. Whilst this trend has first been identified and evolved since 2020 in the report, it's actually already been one in conversation. But in 2020, what was shared was there's a focus on publishing open data to create impact and a high call to have a more systematic way to measure its impact on the community and society as a whole. Over time, and in 2021, this evolved to a more structured understanding, monitoring, and a way to measure the open data impact. And also identifying what the key challenges to measuring open data impact are and why addressing these challenges are a priority. That leads to this year, where we've now identified several of the challenges and are looking for a uniform way to approach this. Examples of the challenges. One is uniformity on what impact actually is and how we are quantifying or measuring it in a way that is consistent and comparable to others. The second is, what dimensions are we actually covering here? So this was also reflected in the methodology update. We are looking, when talking about impact, we're looking at societal impact. We're looking at environmental impact, at economical impact, and government political impact. But amongst these four, what exactly in that are we looking to measure and why and how? Following this is how to account for and distinguish between open data and non-open data and its impact. Going that most services and applications use a wide range of types of data, how much of the actual impact and relevance of this links to open data itself? Before proceeding and moving a bit forward, it is also interesting to note there's a shift in perspective here, and this is also reflected in the slide I showed earlier. Whilst impact is now a high topic of conversation, there is an undertone that also is quite important and was once identified as a key trend, and that is the shift from the quantity of data to the quality of data. So, as shown in the previous slide, we have now introduced the impact and quality dimension to the report. This is because there is now conversation amongst the data providers that the quality is needed for the actual reuse and to actually measure the impact. Even though we may have this abundance of data available, if they are not reusable or if they cannot actually help in supporting the creation of this, there needs to be another conversation that leads to another conversation of what's the value of it. So moving forward and in the years to come, when we're discussing not just the impact of the open data, we also are looking at the quality of the data that is being used and how it's supported by its findability by the portal and also by the European landscape around it. The third point that is a trend and that was identified this year are the new and old common challenges across Europe. So taking several steps back, since 2020, and one of the ones that we can discuss here is the COVID-19 pandemic. It's a hot topic and has had a massive impact on almost all aspects of life across the world. And at the time, at 2020, a finding was that the pandemic has emphasized and highlighted a genuine need for open data to support applications and services. This evolved further in 2021 to highlight the value and impact open data has in providing health support and for other services such as groceries and delivery and for other sectors to the consumers. But now we're expanding to include and go beyond COVID-19. And this trend that's identified here is that whilst we are still recovering from a post-pandemic world, there are other challenges and other points that complement and have also an increased urgency here. One is the need for skilling or reskilling to match the needs for this increasingly digitalized world. And the second is the energy market, which has a higher focus, especially in Europe since the last year. And is especially due to the aggression that is happening in Ukraine. We've already noted in the 2020 report that a lot of member states and a lot of data providers are sharing that open data is being used to help support in either the relief efforts or in supporting the transition in the energy market and how to smooth over, let's say, the economic situation as is and the societal impact. Thus, an identified trend in 2020 is that open data can continue to support businesses, initiatives, and various stakeholders in creating and communicating with others about solutions and alternatives going forward. But what does this all mean? Going to my next slide, which is what can we look for going ahead and what will actually have an impact on the policy impact portal and quality dimension, is the EU legislative landscape linking a bit heavily on the policy, but having a very, very practical impact on the other three dimensions. So at the core of this entire thing is the European Strategy for Data, which focuses on putting people first in developing technology and defending and promoting European values and rights in the digital world. The European Strategy for Data actually includes and is complemented by the three other legislation shown below. Going into more detail and now focusing first on the Open Data Directive, as we know and as shared, this was first enforced in January 2019, and why it's very interesting, especially for the purpose of this call and going forward, is because it introduced the Implementing Act on High-Value Datasets, which was formally adopted last December and is now officially published as of last month, in 20th of January. The Implementing Act will also be applicable as of June next year. And as stated, the 2020 ODM was gauging the preparedness of countries in implementing the high-value datasets. The focus now will slightly shift between beyond being prepared for it, how are member states and data providers actually implementing it in their national policy and in terms of impact, portal, and quality. So, and as a reminder to everyone, there are several aspects that are, and to give an example, there are several aspects that are directly required as part of this act. One is to make sure that datasets are reusable for free through application programming interfaces. The second is making sure that data is available in machine-readable formats. And the third is that this data is available in bulk where it is possible. As stated, the fact that these 3 points, these 3 points will have a wide impact on the findability and discoverability on the portal itself, on the quality and the completeness of the data in terms of the quality dimension, and on the impact that it will have on the community itself. Thus, instead of preparedness for implementing it, The focus will now be on how the data providers are actually progressing it. Before, most likely in 2024, 2025, we will look at the actual impact that it has had and the level of compliance from the different data providers. Moving on to the Data Governance Act, which will complement the Open Data and Public Sector Directive. The aim of the DGA is to facilitate data sharing and strengthen the mechanisms to increase data availability and address technical concerns to reusing data. So it was proposed initially in December 2020. It entered into force last year in June and will become applicable this year in September. The DGA includes mechanisms to foster data reuse that, for certain reasons, cannot be made available as open data. This includes health or mobility data that can be protected on grounds of statistical or commercial confidentiality, intellectual property rights, or privacy. Nevertheless, it is still possible for these datasets to be discoverable. The publication of metadata containing information about these existing datasets is required according to the DGA, where member states are required to establish a so-called national single information point that can provide a central access point for external users to search for and find information about the affected public sector data in their respective countries. While the relevant data might not be available as open, these national single information points should allow users to identify and issue access to requests for the relevant public sector bodies. What is important for all of you to know and why we're highlighting this here is that the data.europa EU will be the central access point for this metadata going forward. And in a few months, we will be publishing a set of harvested guidelines for data providers in Europe, which will have a role and play an impact to the open data community and their maturity going forward. Next to this, and the final point I would like to highlight in this legislative landscape is the Data Act, which was first proposed last year in February. The Data Act will complement both the Open Data Directive and the DGA as it aims to foster innovation and opportunities across Europe. Currently, the DGA is still undergoing its first reading phase of the legislative procedure with the European Parliament. But what is good for us to know is that progress was made last year and further progress is expected with most likely an update to happen at the end of this year under the Spanish presidency. As the Data Act matures and more information is available, we will know more definitively how it will impact the open data community. What we do know is that the Data Act aims to have a harmonized framework for industrial non-personal data sharing in the European Union, which does influence the level of open data and non-open data that is available to everyone. So these are the major trends or the overarching themes that we can expect to see going forward and will have an impact on our community. But next to all of this, and to a more practical topic, I would say, we also would like to heavily invite you to please look at our actual report in the dashboard that was shared earlier, as a lot of this information is actually already available there. And on this note, I neatly hand the floor back to Julia to continue.
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Eline. Okay, so again, Menti, we would like now to see if you were attentive. We were a bit long in some explanations, so let's see if something is still understood. And also, with these Menti, we would like to gather a bit of feedback with respect to the 2022 edition. What did you like? And also, what would you like to still see featured in the next edition, for example? So the first question is, what is true about ODM 2022? Is it the 8th consecutive assessment, country score, best in the quality dimension, high-value data sets, and measuring impact are among the key trends? What is true, what is not? I see 31 answers, 33, 6. Okay, let's see. Yeah, you were very attentive. That's really good to see. Indeed, the first and the third answer are correct. And now, mindful of time, what did you like about ODM 2022? So please feel free to share with us anything that you like from the country's best practices to having more focus on certain dimensions, the visualization, country ranking, accuracy. That's good to see. Sharing spirit, I also like that very much. I see the value of open data maturity, especially in that. Maybe we can visualize that also, put it on a slide when we will share the content. I think there are already some great responses. The position of Ukraine, high-value data sets. Okay, and then my next question would be, what else would you like to see in the next ODM report? Okay, I see some answers already. Good practices, standardization, data management, linguistic information, local initiatives, more highlighted. New trends, tips and features, data management, datasets downloadable. Okay. Yeah, very, very good. Please keep on commenting. I think this will be still open for a while. In the meantime, I would like maybe to open the floor for questions. And Flora, I give the floor to you for managing the questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Elena and Julia, for this very informative session. We already have received plenty of questions. Some of them have been already answered by the chat. But let me start from a question from Els. Thank you, Els, for the question. This question is to be answered by you, Julia. There is actually 3 questions. The first one is, to what extent can the change in impact score be explained by the changes in the methodology?
Good question. So I would say it is mostly explainable through the change of methodology, because compared to other dimensions, the impact was really restructured. As we said, we added, or we divided one indicator into 2, and this led, of course, to also countries to be a bit more challenged in that dimension, to respond more thoroughly, especially in the distinction between reuse of open data, how they monitor it, which kind of tools do they use? Do they use interviews? Do they use surveys? They look at log files, and also to which extent this reuse they know and they can prove they have data, or they can prove it through use cases, have an impact on the different dimensions. So I think it mostly related to it. However, we also need to say that we tried, of course, to maintain some kind of consistency with respect to the previous year. So we see strategic awareness, for example, still being considered as in 2021. So yeah, I would say this is it.
I think Els had a follow-up question just now, to what extent, and we can summarize that it was the majority. So I would gauge over 85% of it was due to the restructuring, if I had to pick a number. The others was mostly also because of fine-tuning, or just differences in the types of answers from previous year, or more critical self-assessment.
Yeah, thank you, Elena.
Thank you. And another question from Els was on impact. So can you give some examples of how countries create impact in terms of strategic awareness or governmental impact?
So strategic awareness is not one of the impact areas. So governmental impact is indeed one of the areas where we try to see if the reuse of data creates impact. And examples that you can find also in the report in the governmental areas are, for example, in Italy, Italy brought up an example for increasing government efficiency and effectiveness in delivering public services, which is Pronto Soccorso Lazio Ospedali, where they develop from the data of Open Data Lazio portal an estimation or a way of estimating how many people are waiting in an emergency room and in a hospital, and thus they identify they identify how many patients are there and how best, of course, to approach also this situation. So how best to provide the service in an efficient way. This is an example, or another example more related to decision making comes from Sweden, where country administrative boards in the north of the country especially use data-driven map based on open data for tracking protected natural areas and to support the daily processes and decisions making related to these protected areas.
Thank you, Julia. And one last question from Els. It seems you only measured preparedness for the implementation of high-value datasets regulation. Is this correct? If yes, why did you decide not to include other policy developments in your assessment methodology?
Yeah, I think I would say, first of all, because the high-value datasets implementing regulation was already included in the previous editions, because it was supposed to be published very, very soon. There was a slight delay in the publication, so I think there was really a momentum and asking and willingness also for countries to know more about that. So probably we could say we prioritize that argument, that the legislation over others, which are still a bit behind in terms of developments. But maybe for further thinking, I can give the floor also to Elina, who presented the legislative landscape. Elina, if there is anything you want to add on this.
I'm looking again at Elsa's questions. I was scrolling in the chat to find it. It seems that measurement preparedness. Yes, that is correct. So this year, or in 2022, we focused more on the preparedness, given that we were also lacking a bit on clarity of what exactly would be included, although we knew that the APIs and the bulk would be in some ways mentioned. So why did you decide not to include other we decided not to include others because the high-value data was the one that was most focused on was one of the focuses of the Open Data Directive and had a much more transparent or much clearer impact on the open data community. We realized, though, after that was published, that the DGA really heavily complemented the Open Data Directive, which is why we included it in the recommendations, but not as an explicit question. Going forward, and it's one of the things that we picked up on and redefined as responses came in, and as we're looking into the methodology of 2023, is that other aspects, such as the data spaces, which we haven't actually covered extensively in this webinar so far, is also influential and has especially in the policy dimension, an impact on the community as a whole. And to answer the question, that was because of the clear link from the high-value data sets to the Open Data Directive. That's why it was included, saying that we've realized that there are others that do have an impact, and we are seeing how it can be incorporated or included going forward still. And that's why it was not included so thus far. Does that answer your question, Els?
Els, if you want to, you can use the chat.
Yes, sorry, I couldn't unmute. Yes, thank you, and I will not monopolize the questions anymore. So now it's the floor for the others. Thank you.
Always open for questions, and I also believe that some questions asked also overlap with what others have as well. So there is no such thing as a monopoly here.
Yeah.
Thank you. So the next question is from Maria. How would regression of countries from more mature to less mature groups be explained? Is it linked to legislation being passed during 1 year policy, but then not followed up with significant implementation measures? What were the rationale behind their selection, and do you plan to select more countries from this category?
Mm-hmm. Maybe I can have a start. So regression in terms of why some countries did not participate, or regression from in terms of scoring, because I think these are two separate things. So on the one hand, we try to give countries in Europe the possibility to participate. So it's an open call. We don't select specifically countries. We have a series of contact points, and we share the timeline and the questionnaire by time so that they can participate. Sometimes maybe there is not the availability within their open data national teams to participate in that specific year, or the interest. And this is why maybe some countries did not participate in 2022 with respect to last year. Having said that, the differences in scoring from one year to another are certainly related, on the one hand, to the progress that was made or not in certain areas, or as indeed in the restructuring of the impact. Might be that indeed that information is not gathered from the country, so they cannot extensively respond to these questionnaires. Which leads me to the point also of saying that, of course, questionnaires go through a series of validation and analysis rounds, and it is really important for us that countries respond and self-assess themselves in a truthful way and also in an extensive way, which allows us to understand whether they're answering the question, whether the information is true or not. We try to back this up with desk research, of course, and by asking also countries to complement the answers. But sometimes, if there is not a complementation, of course, the score will be different. I don't know if anyone wants to add
no additions on my
this
side. No additions on my side. It's highlighting that this is self-assessment, and we do our best to validate and communicate with the data providers. And sometimes the regression is noted either from the differences in answers, to which we also do tend to identify that there was a difference to the previous years and ask, but it is also up to the data providers to provide the additional input so that we can proceed to give a fair score for everybody based on the input. I hand the floor back to Flora.
Thank you. Then we have also a question from David, if that he is asking if the report measures the open data maturity of the user, and if not, if that would be interesting. So this is a very good idea, and thank you very much for this. On data.europa.eu, we explore like new horizons with open data, and we have upcoming reports depending on the trends on this specific field. Currently, there is not one report, but we explore this, and we are ensuring they have the understanding of open data by our users that visit our portal. The next question is from Teona. About the participating countries. What were the rationale behind their selection, and do you plan to select more countries from this category? For instance, we have been using your results for our local advocacy purposes, and since you have not included Georgia for this year, it will be important to have the country included for next year assessments to better highlight needs and challenges and advocate particular recommendations.
Yeah, I think we slightly touched upon this point in my earlier answer. There is not a selection in terms of we don't want to exclude any countries who wants to participate. I think it's very informative also to have further countries beyond the EU27 participating, and Georgia is one of the countries where we have the contact with, and unfortunately they couldn't participate or didn't answer to our call this year. But this is a very good point, and I hope that with this advocacy campaign, we will make sure that they will in 2023 assessment.
Thank you. Then we have a question from Carlos. Carlos is asking, do you plan in the future to coordinate and visualize local initiatives in each country and to measure them too? Many researchers face the difficulty of locating local initiatives in other countries due to language barriers, among others. This is something that I can answer. So the open data maturity is an exercise only done at national level, and we do not expect to go into the granularity of regional and local administrations. However, we're aware of about the importance of the local and regional data sets, and we work to publish this type of data sets on data.europa.eu. And we encourage countries to have on the same time a more harmonized approach when publishing the datasets at national level, bringing together datasets from the municipal authorities. I hope that answered your question, Carlos. I see we are receiving more and more questions, and I see there's also a big discussions on high-value data sets. Just to mention on this that we will take it into account for future webinars, reports, and other initiatives. I'm also aware of the time, so we will take one more question, and then we can answer to all of the rest of the questions via the report that we will share with you. So one last question from Jonathan. What do the subject matter experts on the team expect to be a great demonstrator of progress for this report next year?
Would you like to start, Julia?
No, please start.
Regarding the portal side, one of the great demonstrators, one of the great indicators factors that I foresee being a indicator is continuing the findability of the high value data sets and distinguishing with the data sets. And next to the high value data sets, it's that DGA list or that single access information list that has all the non-open data going forward, and promoting the findability and communication with the community itself. Regarding the quality side, I am torn between 3 points of it. One would still be the licensing, because that is one of the factors I didn't discuss in this, but of the reason for a decrease in this, potentially for a decrease in the score internally. And that's because the consistency in the type of licenses used for different data sets. So on the one hand, you have the DCAT AP maturity going, which I do think is my second point of being very important going forward, but also what kind of license to use for the high value data sets and for the regular, let's call data sets going forward. And if I had to really pick one, it would still be the overall metadata quality and improving the metadata quality of the high value data set itself, complemented by the licensing and DCAT AP compliance going forward.
Yeah, I think on impact side will be more and more required to provide also concrete data on the impact, if possible, if gathered. That would be really insightful also for other works that data.europa.eu does in the field. So beyond use cases, and in terms of policy, as we mentioned, there are also other EU legislative files upcoming or becoming relevant, among which the Data Governance Act. So I'm sure this could be also another topic of interest.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I am aware of the time, so let's go on the next slide. Just for your information, we're preparing a lot of activities in 2023. We have a revamped academy, so I recommend all of you to go and check it. We are planning to have a dedicated webinar series to the open data maturity dimensions that we mentioned today. So stay tuned. We will come with more information soon. We will have ad hoc activities on data spaces and open data, and we will have the Data Governance Act technical recommendations in March 2023. For more information, please do sign up for the newsletter and follow us on our social media. And last but not least, we would like, now it's the moment that we would like you to scan this QR code and take a few minutes to share with us your feedback. In case you cannot scan it, we shared now just the link, so it will be so beneficial for us to receive your feedback, and I will give you a few more minutes to scan it. And in the meantime, I would like to thank our two presenters, Julia and Eileen, for this very much informative session, and all of you for your participation and all of your questions. As we mentioned, we will make sure to answer all of the questions that we didn't manage to answer in our report. Thank you once again and hope to see you soon in our next webinars.